At 3 o'clock in the morning, Jason's socially phobic little assistant stopped the wedding motorcade. She knelt in the heavy rain, begging Jason not to marry me. Otherwise, she said she would die. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, I asked the driver to turn the car around. His friends started jeering. Jason sneered with certainty. Let's coax the little girl to be happy first. Don't worry. In less than 3 days, Stella will propose to me again. However, 3 months had passed, and I hadn't contacted him even once. He finally panicked and called me. Stella, just give in a little and our wedding can continue. I chuckled softly and pushed away the man who was kissing the back of my ear. Give in? Jason, I've always only been impressed by toughness. It was a little after 3 o'clock in the morning, and the wedding motorcade was moving forward in the rain curtain. Jason held my hand. Stella, being able to marry you is the greatest luck in my life. I turned my head and traced his familiar eyebrows and eyes with my gaze, as if I could see what he looked like when he was young. Jason. I called his nickname. And just as I opened my mouth, my eyes unexpectedly became sour. What's going on? Why did the car stop? The bridesmaid Shirley had just spoken when her voice changed. What's that thing? How does it look like a woman? In the thick rain and fog, under the dim yellow stacheltwide, a woman in a long white dress was standing in the middle of the road not far away, holding a black umbrella. In just an instant, the strength with which Jason held my hand suddenly increased, squeezing my hand painfully. I tugged hard. And then he seemed to wake up suddenly and gave me a vacant look. Stella, I'll be right back. When he got up, I grasped the corner of his clothes tightly, as if I were grasping the last glimmer of hope for him and me. Jason, can you not go? In our place, during the process of fetching the bridegroom and the bride are not supposed to get out of the car halfway. Because it's for the good omen of staying together until old age, growing old together. Jason was silent. Jason let out a low sigh. It's unlucky to get out of the car halfway. If you dare to get out, just try it. Shirley had a hot temper and was threatening. Soon, let out a low sigh. The cars behind also stopped one after another. Relatives and friends who were sending off the bride and fetching the bride walked over one after another, holding umbrellas. Someone had already gone forward to negotiate. However, Jason still pulled out the corner of his clothes little by little. He patted my hand. I'll go and drive her away. When the car door opened, the rain and fog rushed in, and a layer of coolness covered my arm. At the same time, the suppressed crying of the girl also came in. Mr. Jung. I leaned against the car window and watched Jason running under the dim yellow light. His back was getting farther and farther away from me. At this moment, it was so similar to the scenes that had repeatedly appeared in my dreams recently. Similarly, I watched helplessly as Jason drifted further and further away, yet I could do nothing. They had a fierce argument. The umbrella fell to the ground. Only then did I recognize that the girl blocking the way was Jason's little assistant Jocelyn. Jason had mentioned her to me many times, saying that she was so introverted that she was really not suitable to be an assistant. He said that she was so socially phobic that she would stutter when talking to strangers. When he talked about her, his tone was so impatient. What a useless person. After having her around for so long, she can't even negotiate. She almost ruined my cooperation with the Fu family. If it weren't for the fact that you, Stella, asked me to take her in, and if it weren't for pitying her, I would have fired her long ago. He had said several times that he wanted to terminate the employment contract. However, unexpectedly, this girl he despised now had the courage to stop the wedding motorcade. At this moment, the drenched girl knelt in the middle of the road. The fabric clung to her slender body, making her look so weak and helpless. Mr. Jung, Langsun, please, don't marry her. Don't abandon me, or I'll die. My uncle and cousin reprimanded Jason, and his relatives and friends in the wedding motorcade also persuaded him. Jason clenched his fists tightly. He looked back in the direction of the wedding car. He let the girl clutch his trouser leg and beg. He didn't shake her off, nor did he make a promise to her. At this moment, he hesitated. Ignoring Shirley's obstruction, I got out of the car. The rain and fog immediately engulfed me. I stood beside the car. The hem of my white wedding dress was wet from the puddles. It didn't look particularly dirty, but somehow it made me feel uncomfortable in my heart. Just like Jason's current behavior. Jason. I called him. He then seemed to wake up suddenly. Lifted his foot. Broke free. And said angrily, "Jocelyn, you really disgust me. If you want to die, go die far away. Don't block other people's way. You're such bad luck." He turned around and ran towards me, holding my hand. "Stella, what are you doing out of the car? The rain is so heavy." I looked at him, who was already soaked, and felt that he was so strange at this moment. My uncle and cousin looked at me. "Stella, if you feel wronged, we can turn around and go home right now. We don't have to get married after all." I shook my head. If Jason had treated me like this before, I would definitely have turned around and left him without hesitation. However, things were different now. Now, I couldn't leave. When the wedding car arrived at Jason's home, it was still not dawn. When we were serving tea, Jason's mobile phone in his pocket kept vibrating. As soon as the tea was served, he excused himself by saying that there was an urgent matter in the company and went out to the balcony to answer a phone call. When he came back after answering the phone, his face looked a bit ugly. "Stella, you take a rest first. We still have to toast at the wedding later. I'll go downstairs to greet the guests first." When he walked to the door, I stopped him. "Jason, do you still remember what you said on the day you proposed?" He turned his head around, smiled rather forcefully, and avoided my question. "Stella, it's busy downstairs." I watched his back, and that bold conjecture became even clearer. After he left, Shirley and several other bridesmaids surrounded me to take pictures. Shirley was still angry about the incident of the car being stopped in the morning. That woman clearly had bad intentions. "Stella, you're really too soft-hearted. You used to be so proud. When did you become such a spineless person who lets Jason push you around?" "Yes. When was it?" "In the past. Between Jason and me, I was the spoiled and willful young lady. And he had always been my loyal attendant who never complained." I felt so stuffy in my heart that I excused myself to go to the bathroom to avoid her anger. I originally wanted to take a breath in the bathroom. Unexpectedly, having fulfilled my obsession, when I casually glanced out of the window, I saw Jason running towards the black umbrella outside the courtyard wall. They stood under the black umbrella for a long time with their toes facing each other. The black umbrella swayed occasionally, shaking off drops of water. After a long time, Jason left under the umbrella and rushed back into the courtyard in a hurry. I stared blankly at myself in the mirror for a long time, not knowing whether my decision to insist on marrying Jason was right or wrong. When I opened the bathroom door, I heard them saying that Jocelyn was an ungrateful person. They said that I had sponsored her to finish college all the way and then got her into Jason's company. Unexpectedly, the seemingly innocent and pitiful little white flower had such deep motives. I've said it before. The dogs that bite don't bark. Stella used to be such a sunny girl. Look what she's become now. They didn't know that the reason why I had become like this was not just because of Jocelyn. More because of Jason. I wanted to wait for him to come back. At the wedding banquet in the evening, Jason was absent-minded throughout the whole process. His eyes wandered, and from time to time he glanced at the main entrance. When we were exchanging wedding rings, Jocelyn appeared at the main entrance in a white off-the-shoulder wedding dress. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, her face was as pale as paper, and her thin body seemed to be trembling slightly. She begged, "Mr. John, please don't get married. I'll die." Everyone's eyes were focused on the three of us. This ungrateful person is really arrogant. She's so bold as to force a marriage at the wedding scene? Even so, Stella can endure it? How spineless. She's making a fuss here. It's ridiculous. What's on her mind? Does she think she can hide it from anyone? The Jason family is the best resource she can get in touch with, right? Of course. She'll use all means to squeeze in. It's ridiculous that Stella has sponsored her for so many years. At this moment, I became a joke in everyone's eyes. Jason held my hand, pulled me behind him, and looked gloomily at Jocelyn. "Jocelyn, Can you stop making trouble? You said you'd marry me. Jocelyn held the blade across her wrist. You lied to me. Jason. You should remember that it's you. It's you who drove me to death. The moment she pretended to cut down, my hand was released and dropped heavily. Jason left me again under the dazzling halo. The guests were in an uproar. Shirley rushed forward angrily. Jason? What do you mean? Jason held Jocelyn's right hand and took the blade out of her hand. I can't watch her commit suicide. And I can't let her ruin my wedding. Before everyone could react, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her outside. Jocelyn's white veil fluttered behind her. They looked just like a newlywed couple as they ran outside. As if they were running towards their beautiful future. At this moment, I finally understood that perhaps my Jason would never come back. I tore off my veil and threw away the wedding ring that hadn't had time to be put on Jason's ring finger yet, bearing all kinds of gazes that fell on me like spotlights. Whether they were sympathetic, mocking, pitiful, or even gloating, I made a difficult decision: the wedding is cancelled. In the afternoon, after cleaning up the mess left over from the wedding, I went back to Jason's place to pack my things. The bed that had been neatly made was now in a mess. The 2 wedding dolls that had been placed at the head of the bed were also thrown on the floor. The familiar veil was discarded on the way from the bedroom to the bathroom. Further along were the wedding dress, wedding shoes, and women's underwear. My hands couldn't stop trembling. I couldn't bear to imagine the scene of Jason's body embracing another woman. As I was stuffing clothes into the suitcase, laughter came from outside the door. Fourth brother. Is everything okay with Stella? Through the crack of the door, I saw Jason holding Jocelyn's hand and pulling her to sit on the sofa. Don't worry. She loves me so much that within 3 days, she'll surely propose to me again. Yes, hadden fastel wine session. It was I who took the initiative to propose marriage. That day, the fireworks all over the sky at the proposal scene seemed to tell Jason that I loved him and wanted to be with him. He let out a soft sigh. Miss. For this kind of thing, I should have been the one to take the initiative. He embraced me in his arms among the brilliant fireworks and kissed me gently and restrained lie. Later, I learned that he had also been preparing to propose to me that day. Just setting up the scene took him a whole week of his rest time. Coincidentally and unfortunately, I got ahead of him. In just 3 months, the man who had once been so in tune with me had changed. At this moment, he let Jocelyn clutch the corner of his clothes, looked at her pitifully as she lowered her head, and listened to her timidly plead, Mr. Zhang, Lei Wei, don't abandon me. He put his arm around her shoulders and teased her. How could I? I won't let you die. His appearance of coaxing her, like a little bird, made his brothers start to jeer. Fourth brother. You're really something. You finally achieved the ideal of having a stable relationship at home while having affairs outside. No, Evesadar. Fourth brother. I always feel that you've changed. You said before that in this lifetime, you were set on Stella and would never have second thoughts. Jason frowned, and his face had already changed. Yes. Stella had indeed been the only one in his heart before. She was like a proud peacock. Dazzling. And he was just an unknown sparrow, feeling inferior and self-pitying. He had been secretly in love with her for over a decade. He had her photos on the walls, beside the table, and at the head of his bed in his room. He finally managed to become her boyfriend, only to find that it was nothing special after all. She was ambitious and independent and didn't rely on him at all. The closer he got to her, the less sense of accomplishment he felt and the more inferior he became. After a long time, he also found her a bit boring. She was so old-fashioned that she was only willing to give herself to him after marriage. She wouldn't wear sexy clothes to please him. She wouldn't act cacophysly, seek excitement, or be clingy like a little bird. In contrast, Jocelyn was much better. Just looking at her frail and timid appearance could arouse his protective instinct as a man. She was gentle and considerate and always put him at the center of everything. She was even willing to abandon her self-esteem to seek excitement with him. For example, in the morning under the umbrella, with a hazy look in her eyes, she proposed to snatch the bride at his and Stella's wedding. She said, if Stella really loves you, she will surely propose to you again. Then, When you marry her again, won't you be able to have her completely under your control in the future? He had always felt inferior in front of Stella, so he was quickly tempted by this idea. What was even more irresistible to him was that he, who had been ordinary all along, had never experienced the feeling of being fought over by two girls before. Sure enough, at the moment when Jocelyn snatched the bride, Stella's red and teary eyes made him feel an unprecedented pleasure. With this overwhelming pleasure, he dragged Jocelyn and ran out of the wedding venue. Impatiently, having fulfilledly, he embraced her and rolled on the new bed that Stella had arranged with her own hands. He behaved more fiercely than ever before. Amid Jocelyn's tears, he called out Stella's name. Someone's voice defending him brought him back to his senses reluctantly. That person said, "What's wrong with keeping a little bird? Fourth brother doesn't stop loving Stella. Who doesn't like something new?" Exactly. Besides, Stella is so strong-willed. Being with her puts too much pressure on fourth brother. It's okay to find a cute and obedient one to relieve the pressure, isn't it? He played with the lighter in his hand and gave that person a deep look. That was so right. His ultimate destination was still Stella. I dragged my suitcase out while they were making all kinds of excuses for Jason. The slight sound of the suitcase wheels rubbing against the floor made Jocelyn keep hiding in Jason's arms in fright. "Sorry, Sister Stella. I'm sorry." She looked like she was about to cry. And indeed, she could make men feel a bit more pity for her. But Jason moved aside a little and distanced himself from her. She blushed with embarrassment and helplessness, looked at me in panic, then quickly lowered her head and clutched the corner of her clothes. No, it should be said that it was the corner of my clothes. That dress was mine. I bought it and hung it in Jason's wardrobe but hadn't worn it yet. I didn't pay attention to her and snorted contemptuously, since I was the one who took the initiative to choose Jason at the beginning. I had the courage to bear the consequences of making the wrong choice. As for you, you like second-hand goods that others have used so much that you're willing to be a mistress knowingly. You're really shameless. I glanced at Jason with a gloomy face and then turned into the study. However, the next moment, when I walked out, I couldn't maintain the nonchalant appearance I had just had. I held the cactus with its roots rotted and said in a trembling voice, "Who did this?" Obviously, having fulfilled what I'd say. I had raised it for over 2 years, and it had been fine all along. "What's the matter, Stella? What are you making a fuss about?" Jason reprimanded. "Jason, have you forgotten what I said?" I asked. He looked confused. "What words?" "The origin of this cactus. I told you when I put it in the study. If it's dead, there's nothing we can do. I'll buy a similar one for you." His casual attitude made my suspicion in my heart even stronger. When I gave the cactus to him at the beginning, his eyes were full of stars. He took it so carefully. "Miss, please don't worry. I will definitely take good care of it. As long as it exists, I exist. If it dies, I die. I won't allow it to have any accidents." I threw myself into his arms. "What nonsense are you talking about?" But now, it was Jocelyn in his arms. She looked so frightened and said in a low voice, "Sorry, Mr. John. When I came here a few days ago, I watered it a little." I stared at Jocelyn in disbelief and carefully placed the flower pot on the counter beside me. When I turned around, I rolled up my sleeves. "Jocelyn, you saw the moments I posted, right? 3 months ago, I posted a photo of the cactus with the caption, 'Grandma. It's living better than before after changing the flower pot. Are you happy?'" She said timidly. "Sister Stella, I really didn't mean it. I didn't know that the stainless steel kettle contained boiling water." She looked so pitiful. However, her words were full of provocation. If she was really scared, she wouldn't have deliberately emphasized that what she watered was boiling water. When I raised my hand to slap her, Jason blocked in front of Jocelyn. "Stella, are you crazy? Whoever stops me today will have the Stella family against them." I pushed Jason aside. Seeing that I brought up the Stella family, the others who had originally stood up to persuade me sat back down slowly. Jocelyn was just a little plaything that Jason kept. She wasn't worth them using their business as a bet. Jocelyn panicked and retreated to the corner of the sofa, like a frightened little sparrow. I grabbed her hair and slapped her twice without hesitation. Amid the slapping sounds, it seemed that Grandma's kind teachings came. People are just like these plants. In the first few days after being transplanted, they look wilted as if they're about to die. But if they survive these days, they may live better. Stella, you should also be like them when you encounter difficulties in the future. This cactus was given to me by Grandma on her deathbed. She said it was strong and resolute and told me to be like it too. However, such a strong cactus was killed by this seemingly timid, but actually malicious socially phobic girl. Jason grabbed my wrist and shouted in a low voice. Enough. I raised my hand towards him. However, when I saw his eyebrows and eyes, I still couldn't bring myself to hit him. My Jason from when we were young. How did I lose him? I held the flower pot in one hand and dragged the suitcase in the other and walked out of Jason's villa. Jason's angry voice came from behind. Stella, if you apologize to Jocelyn now, I'll pretend that nothing happened. I twitched the corner of my mouth, turned around, looked at him standing in the shadow, and sneered, Jason, Wavanalothai. Someone who doesn't love himself but still fantasizes that others will love him without principles? Don't you think you're a clown? Don't you regret it? Only a dog would regret it. I turned around and left without looking back. When I walked until I was tired and sat on the roadside, the sad emotions overwhelmed me like a tidal wave. I couldn't keep Grandma's cactus. I also couldn't keep Jason. What kind of soul was now residing in Jason's body? Where had my loyal and devoted Jason been driven to? Or was it that he had always been able to only watch helplessly as this interloper occupied his body, and betrayed me in various ways? Yet he was powerless? How desperate he must be when he couldn't control his own body. Finally, I couldn't help crying bitterly. I originally thought that as long as I stayed by Jason's side, one day, he would come back. However, 3 months had passed, and he was becoming less and less like himself. Recently, he didn't even bother to pretend anymore. Through my teary eyes, a clean handkerchief was handed to me. Crying won't solve any problems. Stand up, face the difficulties, and defeat them. These words were so familiar. Suddenly, it seemed that I saw myself sitting on the roadside when I was 7 or 8 years old. Jason handed me a handkerchief. Crying won't solve any problems. Stand up, face the difficulties, and defeat them. Not a single word was different. And even the tone was exactly the same. I raised my head and saw someone's wisteria hanging on the mottled iron fence of the courtyard wall. Under the light purple flower clusters, the man was wearing a dusty camouflage uniform with mud spots on his trouser legs. But the handkerchief he handed over was clean and tidy. He was plain looking. And there was even a scar on his forehead, but his peach blossom eyes were surprisingly bright. At this moment, his eyebrows and eyes were slightly curved, and somehow, it made me feel as if Jason was looking at me with an indulgent smile. Jason. I took the handkerchief and couldn't help calling out. He was startled and hesitated to speak. You got the wrong person. Then he gave me a deep look and turned around to leave. He walked with a slight limp. Really? Was it just a case of mistaken identity? Since I noticed that Jason might be having an affair with Jocelyn 2 months ago, I had contacted many famous doctors, trying to figure out the reasons for Jason's change of heart and change in temperament. It seemed that as long as I admitted that there was something wrong with Jason's physical functions, I could deceive myself into reducing the pain in my heart. However, his examination results showed that there was nothing abnormal. I blocked all of Jason's contact information and started to formally take over the Stella family group. Meanwhile, I hired 2 assistants at a high salary. I'm just so in terms of business management talent. Fortunately, having fulfilledly, I've been influenced by it since childhood and have been guided by capable people around me. It took me about a month to finally take over smoothly. The next time I saw Jason and Jocelyn was at the bidding meeting for the plot of land in the west of the city. There was a bluish-gray tinge under his eyes. Even in his high-end custom-made suit, he couldn't hide the fatigue and haggardness on his face. It was said that because of the cancellation of the wedding, the directors of the John Group had expressed great dissatisfaction with him. Although the Joan family was powerful, their business content was rather traditional. On the other hand, the Stella family was a rising star and had developed rapidly in recent decades, especially with a strong momentum in high-tech projects. The marriage between the two families could maximize the benefits. After they dug up all the details about Jocelyn, they made a big fuss about Jason's identity as an illegitimate child and intended to support Yuri, Jason's half-brother, to bring Jason down. Therefore, in order to prove himself, Jason was determined to win this bidding. When I took my seat beside Jason with my assistants, what came along was Jason's words, "Check it out. Come back when you've had enough. You're always the daughter-in-law recognized by the Jason family." When he said this, Jocelyn clenched his sleeve tightly and said, "Brother Jason." Jason was under the pressure of his family. Yet he still insisted on keeping Jocelyn by his side. Their love was really touching. I leaned towards Jason and whispered in his ear, "A soul that stinks to high heaven is like a rat in the gutter. You're really disgusting." He was stunned for a moment. The assistant beside me couldn't help chuckling when hearing this. Jason's eyes fell on him, and his brows furrowed tightly as he looked at him warily and asked, "Who is this?" I looked at the assistant wearing sunglasses and a black mask. "Jason, Safin. It's over between us. Let me formally introduce you. This is my soulmate Silas." Jason's expression was hard to tell whether he was angry or happy. "Soulmate? Stella. It's only been a month since we broke up. You found someone to annoy me. And you deliberately found someone surnamed Jong. Which means you still have feelings for me in your heart. I won't blame you. Instead, I'm quite happy." I remembered the way he debated side by side with me when we were in college. At that time, when I turned around, his eyes were just like that. There seemed to be stars in his eyes. He had been not good at expressing himself since childhood. In order to become my teammate, he had put in unimaginable efforts. Coming back to my senses from the memories, I asked Jason, "Do you still remember in high school when I said you were obsessed with practicing your eloquence? It's been over 10 years since high school. How could I remember so much? At that time, you even debated endlessly with me over a flower on the roadside. Once, we debated for half an hour. Do you still remember who won in the end? Of course it was you. You've been eloquent since childhood." I looked at him, unable to hide the hatred in my eyes. Actually, neither of us won that debate. In the end, it ended with him putting his arm around my shoulder and hugging me. "That was our first hug." He said at that time, "Miss, mountains and seas can't separate two people in love, no matter how great the obstacles are. I will do my best to be by your side." My eyes became moist. I turned my head and looked at Silas. Under the cover of the sunglasses, I couldn't see the color of his eyes, but I knew that he must be looking back at me. I tried to calm down my emotions. "I'm going to the washroom." He nodded and gestured with sign language. "Do you want me to accompany you?" I took a look at his leg. "No. I'll go by myself." When I came out of the washroom, I saw Jason leaning against the door smoking. He put out the cigarette and reached out to stop me. "Stella. Actually, I have my own difficulties." I didn't want to hear his so-called difficulties and tried to walk around him to leave. But he grabbed my wrist. "Jocelyn said that if I didn't love her, she would die. Stella. I can't watch a living life die because of me." I looked at the face that had appeared in my dreams countless times, but now seemed so strange, and sneered, "Ridiculous. Jason. You actually believed such nonsense. How could he be so stupid?" I have to believe it. Because, recently, incredible things have happened to me too. I didn't want to talk to him more and struggled to free my wrist. "Let go. That man. You found him to annoy me, right?" His grip got tighter and tighter, and he became inexplicably nervous. "No. He and I share the same interests and have compatible personalities. Stella. I've loved you for over 10 years. You can't leave me." The next moment, he excitedly pulled me into his arms. Everything happened so suddenly. While I was calling the security guards and stamping on his toes hard with my high heels, Jocelyn appeared at the door with red eyes. She looked like she was about to break down and whined pitifully. "Brother Jason." I don't know whether it was because of the pain or Jocelyn's brother that made Jason let go. After I broke free, The first thing I did was to slap Jason hard. The slap that should have landed on his face a month ago, or even earlier, finally happened. Looking at the clear red fingerprints on that fair face, my heart felt as stuffy as the sky before the rain in June, and I could hardly breathe. During this interval, Jason grabbed my shoulders and nervously asked me repeatedly, "Stella, you slapped me? You actually slapped me? Don't you love me anymore? Didn't you love me the most?" Suddenly, a fist hit Jason hard. It was Silas. Back in my seat, I stared at my numb palm. I slapped his face. Silas raised his hand. Before it touched my shoulder, he withdrew it. He chuckled. "I also punched him. Didn't I?" I gently leaned my head on his shoulder, closed my eyes, and suddenly my heart calmed down. However, his body was tense, as if he wasn't used to my closeness. The bidding process was intense, but as the price got higher and higher, in the end, only Jason and I were left. After I repeatedly raised the price, I stopped in time. Finally, having fulfilled my sigh, Jason got what he wanted. I sat in my seat for a long time without moving. When they were leaving, Jocelyn followed behind him and provocatively curled her lips when she looked back at me. I calmly turned my head back and smiled at Silas. It's a success. The plot of land in the west of the city had inconvenient transportation, and I wasn't optimistic about it. Actually, I came here this time just to deliberately raise the price. To celebrate Jason's successful bidding, several of his brothers prepared a small celebration party for him. As soon as he arrived at the banquet hall, he received a call from Yuri. His half-brother. "Brother, what's going on with you? Why did you take Jocelyn to the bidding meeting today? Mind your own business." Jason was extremely annoyed. He was the mainstay of the Jason family. The John Group was all his property. But he had to act according to the looks of the directors when doing something. Now, even his younger brother, who was a top star in the entertainment industry and didn't do his proper job, was qualified to criticize him. "All right. You want me to mind my own business, right? Then I really won't care. Deal with the hot searches about you and Jocelyn by yourself." The hot searches on Jason's wedding day were all suppressed by Yuri. After Yuri hung up the phone, he sent 2 photos. One photo showed Stella quietly leaning on the shoulder of the man wearing sunglasses beside her with her eyes closed. The other one was the scene when he and Stella were arguing. He forcibly hugged her and she struggled. Love or not, it was clear at a glance. At this moment, he was completely panicked. Stella had changed her heart. She didn't love him anymore. He finally understood why he had lost control just now in the washroom. At this moment, no matter how gentle and soft Jocelyn's words were beside him, it was hard to relieve the panic in his heart. He walked out of the banquet hall, and his big brother Henry followed him out. "Fourth brother. Stella is really something. She found a cripple. And he's still wearing sunglasses and a mask. Looking like he can't see the light of day." Jason interrupted his words coldly. "Get lost." Henry looked at him in disbelief. "Fourth brother. You've changed." Yes. Of course Jason knew that he had changed. He originally thought that as long as he had such a family background and identity, he could do what others could do. But now it seemed. He silently cheered himself up. As long as the project in the west of the city was successful, Stella would see how excellent he was. By then, as long as he kicked Jocelyn far away, she would surely come to him eagerly to get back together. After the bidding meeting, I was plunged into busy work again. Fortunately, having fulfilled my desire, Silas was as hardworking as I was. The lights in our office were often on until late at night. When there was no one around, he would take off his sunglasses. But he refused to take off his mask. Looking at those peach blossom eyes that were so similar to Jason's, I often got lost in memories and couldn't extricate myself. In July, with Silas's introduction, I had my first pleasant cooperation with Justin from the Foo Group. When autumn came, news came that the Gion's real estate had a thunderbolt. Jason came to find me on the Mid-Autumn Festival. He had been waiting for me downstairs in my company for a long time. When he saw me walking out of the elevator side by side with Silas, he hurriedly came up to meet us. "Stella, let's get back together. I've already drawn a clear line from Jocelyn." "Stella, I've always loved you. It was she who forced me with death. I took Silas's arm. Jason. I hate you too much to get back together with you. How could it be possible? If possible, I want. I leaned close to his ear and said hatefully. I want you to die. He looked at me in astonishment. With an expression of disbelief. You hate me that much? What's good about him? Stella. In what way is this Silas better than me? A cripple who doesn't even dare to take off his glasses and mask. Just like a rat in the gutter that can't see the light of day. How can he be better than me? I smiled. He's kinder than you. You're the rat in the gutter. When Jason was on the verge of emotional breakdown, he actually forced a smile. Stella. I'll let you see my determination and sincerity. I'm here this time to talk about a cooperation with you. The development prospect of the project in the west of the city is good. I flatly refused. I'm not interested. From early summer to early autumn, Silas and I had advanced step by step and finally caused the capital chain of the Geons project in the west of the city to break. How could I possibly offer help? Not far away came Jocelyn's accusation. Jason. You said you wouldn't abandon me. You can't love others. Otherwise, I'll die. Jason. Do you want to kill me? She was standing in the bright sunlight, with one hand pressing on her wrist. The scene on the wedding day 5 months ago reappeared again. However, this time Jason didn't rush to her as resolutely as last time. He impatiently shouted, Jocelyn. If it weren't for your coercion, how wonderful the days between me and Stella would be now. Just die if you want to. When Jocelyn cut her wrist and the blood dripped on the steps in front of the company, I dialed the police number. Please tell the police when they come that I was forced by Jason to do this. In the end, Jason still gave in to her threat. He walked to Jocelyn, pressed on her wound, and took her to the hospital. I looked at the blood dripping all the way on the ground and said, what bad luck. Every day after that, Jason would send a pot of cactus to the company. When my assistant asked me what to do with it, I subconsciously said, throw it in the trash can. Just because I love my grandmother's cactus doesn't mean I'll fall in love with other cacti that look the same. Finding a substitute is something only pitiful people with weak minds, who can't break free from the dilemma of missing someone, would do. They get a certain level of satisfaction through substitutes and avoid pain. Actually, this is the behavior of the weak. A true strong person will bury that feeling deep in their heart. As time passes, they will weave it into a warm light that guides them forward. The purpose of my grandmother leaving me the cactus was to make me as tough as it is. And I've achieved that. After leaving Jason's side and transplanting myself into my busy career, I've gradually grown. My roots have gone deeper and deeper. And I've survived the sluggishness in the first few days after the transplanting. I've transformed into the resolute person I am now. It's a pity to throw it away, the assistant said. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the beetle-like vehicles on the street. Give it to the flower-selling girl at the intersection. As for the things Jason sends in the future, as long as they can be sold, give them all to her. That girl is also someone I sponsor. Her parents passed away when she was very young. Her grandfather died of illness the year before last, and her grandmother was washed away by the flood and went missing not long after she finished the college entrance examination. There's also a younger sister in junior high school at home, and now she's the only one supporting the family. The assistant turned around and went out. Silas raised his head from the pile of documents. His eyebrows and eyes curved. I thought that after what happened with Jocelyn, you wouldn't easily sponsor others anymore. I tilted my head. Do you think I'm that kind of person? There was a glint of starlight in his eyes. No. Once bitten by a snake, I'll be more careful. However, I won't take my anger out on the innocent rope. On the second day of the Mid-Autumn Festival, when I accompanied Shirley to the hospital, I met Jocelyn in the long corridor of the hospital. She was leaning against the back of the chair, eating an apple while swiping her phone, and her face was terribly gloomy. Although there was gauze wrapped around her wrist, it didn't affect her movements. It seemed that she had cut that knife very skillfully. She looked up and saw me, then rushed over aggressively, completely different from her previously timid appearance. Stella, isn't it just a pot of cactus? Do you have to be so disgusting? What? Do you think making Jason uproot all the flowers in the garden and plant cacti instead can prove something? I looked at the phone screen she held in front of me. It was Jason's Weibo page. Inside the former villa, there were really cacti of all sizes planted everywhere. Just then, Wadala well sigh. Shirley's name was called. I signaled her to go in first and then turned to Jocelyn and said, "Let's go out and talk." As soon as we got outside, she started attacking first. "Stella, no matter what tricks you use, Jason will never leave me." I turned my head and looked into her eyes. "Jocelyn, what do you love about Jason? His appearance? His status? His money?" "Stella, I love him for who he is." "Is it true that you said you'd die if he didn't love you?" She stiffened her neck. "Of course it's true. You're lying." A few days before I proposed to Jason, because Jocelyn cried and said she couldn't find an internship in a company, I went to her school to pick her up, intending to place her in Jason's company. At that time, I hadn't taken over the Stella family business yet. While Jason was already quite proficient in the industry, I thought that if she was placed with him, she could learn more things. While I was waiting for her in the shade of the trees, I heard her say to her roommate who was walking with her, "I recently read a novel about system strategies. If the male lead doesn't love the female lead, the female lead will be deprived of her life. This setting is really interesting. Do you think that if I threaten my boyfriend like this in the future, we'll never break up?" Her roommate said, "Do you think men are fools? If you don't break up, it's because they don't want to break up. If they really want to, maybe they even hope you die earlier." Jocelyn's words brought me back from my memories. "Then what did you love about Jason back then?" I turned around and walked back. "His thoughts. Or rather, his soul." She snorted disdainfully behind me. "A timid, fickle, having so felt mad sigh. And scheming soul?" The autumn sunlight was particularly dazzling, making my eyes ache. Jocelyn didn't know that the former Jason wasn't what she described. In order to continue the capital chain for the project in the west of the city, Jason declared several poorly managed subsidiaries bankrupt, liquidated them, and put them up for auction. Now, they're in my hands. Time passed quietly as Silas and I quietly nibbled away at the John family's business. Time also flew by as Jason updated his short essays on Weibo every day. When Shirley learned that he was expressing his regrets and apologizing to me on Weibo every day, she was so happy that she cursed him several times behind his back. "A jerk lacking in virtue and with a cheap nature. He deserves it." On Christmas Eve, Silas sent me downstairs and handed me an apple. "I hope my young lady will be safe forever." I took the apple and opened my arms. Hug?" He shook his head. "No. I can't accept it." I smiled. "Okay. Now, there's really a distance between us. But I respect you." When I turned around and went upstairs, I looked back and saw him standing quietly where he was, with his hands in the pockets of his windbreaker, looking in my direction. What was he thinking at this moment? When I got upstairs, I found a man reeking of alcohol sitting at the elevator entrance. When I subconsciously tried to quickly bypass him, he grabbed the corner of my coat. "Stella. Look. What did I bring you?" As he spoke, he opened his coat and took out a pot of cactus. "It's exactly the same as the one your grandmother left you. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Please, don't abandon me." I looked at the cactus spine stuck on his beige sweater and said, "Jason, I should thank you for that scene at the wedding. Thank you for not marrying me." His eyes were red, and he looked extremely haggard. "I've loved you for over 10 years. I've been watching you silently for over 10 years. Can you love him but not me?" I looked at the stubble on his chin and his dark eye bags, and hatred grew in me like wild vines. Does a fake think that by wearing the skin of the genuine one, it can win people's love? He panicked. You know? Yes, having fulfilled my ancestration. Dexter. Jason's drunkenness suddenly disappeared. Or rather, Dexter's drunkenness suddenly disappeared. He couldn't imagine that Stella had realized that he wasn't the real Jason. He clearly knew everything about the relationship between Stella and Jason, and he had tried so hard to play the role of Jason. Why could she recognize him? It was all because of Jocelyn. All because of her. Otherwise, he could have married Stella. Even if the real Jason came to find her, Stella definitely wouldn't believe these supernatural things. He raised his head and looked at Stella. She was as lofty as ever. Like his goddess. More like his son. Through his teary eyes, he seemed to see when he was bullied in junior high school. Stella happened to pass by and threw her school bag at the leading classmate. Her high ponytail fluttered gently in the wind. "He's under my protection. If you dare to touch him again, you'll be sorry." At that time, the Stella family's position in City C was already quite significant. Jason beside her even addressed her as young lady, all the time. Those classmates didn't dare to offend Stella and glared at him resentfully before leaving. Later, Dexter paid more attention to Stella. She won the championship in the campus singer competition. She dominated in the debate competition. And she rolled up her trouser legs and went to the fields in the labor practice class. She was like a shining sun, illuminating the darkness of his adolescence. When the results of the high school entrance examination came out, he was so happy that he couldn't sleep, because he could go to the same school as Stella again. However, his alcoholic father and gambling-addicted mother refused to let him go to high school. They mocked him harshly, saying that he was a toad dreaming of going to college. Finally, after his desperate efforts, they agreed to let him go to a vocational high school so that he could come out to work earlier. His school was adjacent to Stella's school, and he fantasized about meeting her. Sure enough, he really met her. She and Jason were blushing with excitement as they argued over a flower. When he summoned up the courage to go up and say hello, Jason smiled and hugged her. Her face immediately turned completely red. At that time, Dexter thought that it would be great if he were Jason. With Jason's identity, she would surely like him too. Later, this became his obsession. Until the night when Stella proposed to Jason. He met a strange person. That person knew what was on his mind and asked him if he was willing to exchange 20 years of his lifespan for his wish to come true. He didn't hesitate to agree. However, now it seemed that even though he had Jason's appearance, family background, and wealth, Stella still didn't love him. Her eyes looking at him were full of hatred. He regretted so much that he didn't push Jocelyn away when she first threw herself at him. He regretted so much that he had that bit of chivalry when he saw Jocelyn on the verge of crying. He regretted so much that he didn't seize this opportunity well, was driven by lust, and treated Stella like that at the wedding. The tears at the corners of his eyes fell into his mouth. And they were all bitter. Stella was right. A rat in the gutter is used to being wretched. Even if it's dressed in a tiger's skin one day, it still doesn't have the ability of a tiger. And the things it does are still so wretched. His heart was as dead as ashes. And he finally had to admit, a little son like Stella was out of his league, no matter what skin you put on. Dexter wiped his tears randomly with the corner of his clothes, muttering, "I'm sorry. If I could do it all over again, I'd be wholehearted. I'm terribly wrong." I looked at his pitiful appearance and was filled with anger. How can we change it back? I don't know. You don't know? Silas' voice came from behind me. He was out of breath as he walked forward, grabbed Dexter's collar, and punched him hard. It turned out that he had been standing downstairs. When he saw that the light in my room hadn't come on for a long time, he was worried that something had happened to me. So, without waiting for the elevator, he ran upstairs. Dexter was beaten black and blue and fled after Silas shouted, "Get out." I opened the door. "Come in and sit for a while?" "No. This body doesn't deserve to enter your house." "Can the girl introduced by Justin really have a way?" "Yeah, Ellie. I heard she's very capable. However, she went to UGUI Village these 2 days. We'll have to wait until she comes back." I looked into his eyes, and a glimmer of hope rose in my heart again. That night, Silas didn't enter my house in the end. The news that Jason came to see me on Christmas Eve and was beaten up by Silas reached Jocelyn's ears. She used the same old trick and cut her wrist with a blade. However, after being threatened time and time again, Dexter was extremely annoyed. This time, instead of calling an ambulance for her, he turned around and left without hesitation. This time, somehow, Jocelyn didn't control her strength well and cut her artery. She didn't call an ambulance immediately. Instead, she dialed Dexter's number again and again like crazy. It wasn't until Dexter turned off his phone that she called an ambulance. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was already on the verge of death. In the end, she couldn't be saved. She finally got her wish and became the female-led, once dying by her own hand. Before she died, she wrote a few words on the wall with her blood: "Jason killed me." The police quickly took Dexter into custody. When Silas and I went to see him, he was on the verge of a breakdown. Actually, I hated him even more. He got himself into trouble by getting involved with Jocelyn, and now the media was already publicizing it widely. In the future, when the real Jason, my Jason, returns to this body, one can imagine how worried he'll be when facing this huge mess. Silas also hated him. He wasn't afraid of dealing with the mess. What he hated was that Dexter hadn't kept himself clean and had had a relationship with Jocelyn while in Jason's body. He felt that even if he went back to his original body, he would still feel disgusted because it had been tainted. When Silas took off his sunglasses, and before he took off his mask, Dexter recognized his original body. Dexter's eyes widened in shock, and he asked Silas in a collapsed state, "Why are you still alive?" Silas turned around and looked at me. Because there was a kind-hearted person who was willing to cover his medical expenses after learning that Dexter was her classmate in junior high school. Actually, the reason why I was willing to cover Dexter's medical expenses was also because his eyes looked like Jason's. Back then, the look in his eyes when he was being bullied reminded me of Jason. Dexter seemed to be crying and laughing at the same time. I originally thought that with parents who were drunkards and gamblers like that, they would definitely give up treating this body, and you would disappear completely. Well, man proposes, God disposes. Silas' eyes reddened. If the nurse hadn't talked about the things between you and Stella in the ward that morning, I might have remained lying in bed and never woken up. I was in a hazy dream and heard that she was betrayed at the wedding. When I thought about the embarrassing situation she was in, my heart, I couldn't allow myself to stay asleep when she was at her most helpless. I held Silas' hand. "Jason, thank you." But he broke free from my hand. He still couldn't accept this body having overly intimate behaviors with me. Even just a simple handshake. How much he must hate the owner of this body. But in front of me, he was so restrained and calm. Suddenly, my heart felt a pang of sadness. Dexter murmured and asked, "Do people who love each other really recognize each other even if they change their appearances? For something as unbelievable as soul exchange. Stella, don't you suspect it?" Of course I suspected it. When Dexter first entered Jason's body, I just thought it was strange that he called me Stella. Because my friends all called me Stella. But Jason never did. He once said that calling me Stella always made him feel that one day I would disappear without a trace. Therefore, he always called me Miss or Stella. Actually, what made me suspicious was that on the second day after I proposed to him, he didn't get up until the sun was high in the sky. When I went to look for him, he wasn't even familiar with the structure of the room. The bathroom in Jason's bedroom was behind the wardrobe, and there was a button beside the wardrobe that would open the door. He didn't wash up in the bathroom but went to the public bathroom in the living room instead. Later, when he wanted to get close to me, I couldn't help but feel disgusted and pushed him away. Until at the wedding that day, I repeatedly mentioned past events, but he kept changing the subject. Actually, at that time, I just thought he was acting abnormally. I didn't dare to be completely sure about the possibility of soul exchange. After all, it was too absurd. It wasn't until Silas showed up, handed me that handkerchief, and said that sentence, "Crying won't solve any problems. Stand up, face the difficulties, and defeat them." But he didn't want to admit that he was Jason. When he turned around to leave, I shouted loudly at his back, "Jason, mountains and seas may separate those who love, but love will conquer all." His sentence helped me and him overcome numerous obstacles and stay together. His steps stopped, and his hand hanging by his side clenched into a fist. I chased after him. He let out a long sigh and said wistfully, "Miss." Just that one word, "miss," made my tears stream down my face again. He was really Jason. This nickname was only used by Jason to call me. Because before he was recognized by the Jason family, he was the adopted son of our family's nanny. When we first met, he called me Miss. At that moment, how happy I was. My Jason hadn't died. Nor was he being oppressed by another soul in his original body, helplessly watching others manipulate his body and betray me. I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes vigorously. But the more I wiped, the more tears came. Finally, Helen Softeldley. I could only smile at him. Jason, let's figure out a way together. Later, he took me to his small rented apartment. In the 10 square meter small room, there was a wooden bed, and the mottled walls were covered with my photos. Each photo had been laminated, and it could be seen that the owner cherished them very much. Strangely, there was a photo of Jason himself in the corner. The photo without lamination was a bit moldy, and there was a bright red X on his face. When I got closer, I realized that the X was so forceful that it seemed to have been drawn repeatedly. I asked him, "Why did you draw an X on your own face?" He said, "It was Dexter who drew it." Only then did I know that Dexter had been secretly spying on my life all along. It turned out that Dexter hated Ken so much that he wanted him dead. The girl introduced by Justin was named Wendy. After she came back from UGUI Village, we met. When she learned all the details of this matter, she asked, "Even if you change back, it won't be clean. I happen to know someone who has a better way to solve this." Later, she took us to meet a man named Arthur. The man had black hair and wore a black robe. His face was as handsome as jade, and his eyes were as black as lacquer. If it weren't for his extremely pale lips, his appearance would be no less than that of any popular top star. He said, "It was originally a troublemaker under my can and who went around stealing people's lifespan. I'll take care of it." Later, he made gestures that we couldn't understand and recited incantations. When we opened our eyes again, we were back on the day of the proposal. I was still me. Jason was back in his own body. He was still the Jason who had little interaction with Jocelyn. He didn't even remember that the sponsored student and I had arranged to work in his company was named Jocelyn. Jason and I went to the riverside. He smiled and said, "This time, let me propose. I prepared for such a long time, but couldn't use it last time. What a pity." I smiled and put my arms around his neck. "Okay, boyfriend." He put his arms around my waist and kissed me on the lips. By the flower bed by the riverside, the autumn sun was just right. There were several newly transplanted big trees supported by scaffolds. Their branches had been cut off, and their trunks were covered with black sunshade cloth. But even though they had been so damaged, they would still be able to sprout tender green leaves in the next spring. Just like Grandma's cactus. Like me. Like Jason. Postscript later, I found out why Jocelyn cried and said that she couldn't find an internship company. Because she had asked someone to take the exam for her and was expelled from school. Jason cancelled her internship qualification. I heard that she latched onto a coal boss and kept telling him every day that she was the heroine bound to a system. If he didn't love her, she would die. She forced the coal boss to divorce several times by cutting her wrists. Later, I don't know whether it was because she cut too deep or for other reasons, but she died in a pool of blood, and Dexter's fate was even more lamentable. On the day when Jason proposed to me, he drove a second-hand van and tried to crash into Jason's car, but the steering wheel malfunctioned, and he crashed into the camphor tree in the roadside green belt. The van overturned, and after he was sent to the hospital, he was told that he had become a vegetable. After his alcoholic father and gambling-addicted mother cried for a while, they decided to give up treatment. They secretly sold his organs to patients in need. Extra story: my name is Jason. The name Jason was given to me by my biological father after I was found by the Jason family in my first year of high school. Actually, hadn't concealed my ancestry. I was originally named Jason. I got my name quite casually, because the day my adoptive mother picked me up was the 4th day of the first lunar month. She hadn't given birth to a child in 8 years of marriage. A Sotunchalert said that her child was destined to have a brotherly bond and advised her to adopt a boy. She was quite lucky. Not long after my biological mother gave birth to me, I was abandoned and at her doorstep. But she didn't treat me well. Especially after my younger brother was born. I often went hungry. Once, I was so hungry at night that I couldn't sleep. I got up to steal the leftovers from the Jason family. I was crying while eating, and was discovered by the miss. Later, she often left food for me. I never went hungry again. She was the salvation in my life. My light. In order to get closer to her, I tried hard to make myself better and better. She would never know how happy I was when I was her teammate and debated side by side with her. After that debate about the flower, I silently told myself, mountains and seas may separate those who love, but love will conquer all. No matter what difficulties stand in the way, I will go to her side without hesitation. My miss, I will love you with my whole life. I studied financial management hard in order to be worthy of her. Before graduating from university, I started to compete in the power field. To make up for the lack of education in my youth, I learned everything she was good at. Although I didn't master them as well as she did. But when she mentioned something, I could have in-depth discussions with her. At the moment when I was hit by Dexter, how scared I was. This time, the mountain was so high and the sea was so deep. I was worried that I couldn't overcome this obstacle. Fortunately, having fulfilled my ad I struggled to wake up. Grandma was right. As long as you survive the first few days after transplanting, you can still live well. After my soul was transplanted into Dexter's body, although it took a full 3 months, but I still got through it. We, who have overcome such a big obstacle to be together, will surely have a future full of sunshine.